I'm Michael Reed, 35 years old, and tonight my cousin Kevin leaned across the dinner table and asked if I was still taking the bus. I was reaching for the soy sauce when he said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. Aunt Linda chuckled behind her wine glass and said something about practicality. My dad didn't laugh, but the look in his eyes said enough, even now after everything. He still thought I hadn't made it. He had no idea that the watch on my wrist was worth more than his entire portfolio before the crash. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever kept quiet, just to let the truth speak for itself. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, the second son in a house that ran on routine and quiet expectation. My dad was a financial advisor, conservative, proud of his watches, the kind that didn't flash but whispered about craftsmanship and history. He used to keep them lined up in a glass case in his study. Each one had a name, a story, a reason. The year the market crashed, he sold them all. Every last one, except for a framed photo of the rarest of them all. One he'd never owned, just admired from a distance. I was 12 the first time he told me about it. The Dufour Grande Sonnerie. He said it wasn't about the price. It was about what it represented. Discipline, excellence, patience. I nodded, even though I didn't really understand. I just liked how his voice changed when he talked about it softer, like he was remembering something sacred. By the time I was in college, Dad had given up on that kind of passion. He pushed both me and my older brother into finance. But while Scott went the route Dad wanted, I started building things, writing code, tinkering in the computer lab. When I should have been prepping for interviews, Dad thought I was wasting time. He never said it outright, but it hung in the space between us. Every holiday, every phone call, every time he introduced me as the one who's still figuring things out. My company started small, just me and 2 friends from undergrad. We coded out of a rented garage in Oakland and pooled our stipends for server time. It didn't look like much, and for a long while, it wasn't just a little AI project that no one believed in, except us. Tonight was the annual family dinner held every year at Golden Dragon on the east side, a place with linen napkins and lacquered menus and dishes. You had to pronounce carefully. It was tradition. Same spot, same jokes, same hierarchy. My cousins arrived in German sedans, wore tailored jackets, passed business cards like confetti. Kevin had just made junior partner at some big firm in New York, and he wanted everyone to know it. I wore a white Oxford shirt, not designer, just clean, just enough to blend in, and the bus dropped me off 3 blocks away so no one saw me get out. It's easier that way, when people already think they know who you are. Easier to let them. But when I reached across the table for the soy sauce, my cuff shifted and the light caught something my dad couldn't ignore. He stared hard, then dropped his chopsticks, and that's when everything changed. Dad didn't say anything at first. He just stared at my wrist like he was trying to convince himself he hadn't seen what he thought he saw. His chopsticks were still on the table beside his untouched plate, his hand frozen mid-air. The conversation around us died out, one voice at a time, until the whole table was silent. Kevin was the first to speak again, but even he sounded different now. That's a Philippe Dufour, isn't it? His voice had lost the usual edge. Grande Sonnerie. There are only 16 of those in the world. Aunt Linda stopped swirling her wine and leaned forward, squinting at the watch, like it might explain itself. Uncle Richard lowered his fork. Mom looked back and forth between me and Dad, clearly confused. I sat back slowly and took a sip of tea, letting the moment stretch. Dad finally cleared his throat. "Where did you get that watch?" His voice was quiet, not angry, just uncertain, like he was searching for some explanation that made sense. "I picked it up at auction last month," I said, setting the teacup down gently. "But that model," Kevin shook his head. "That's a collector's piece. It's not something you just pick up. They don't even show up on the open market." I gave a small nod. "Christie's. Private listing." Dad looked like he hadn't heard a word past that. His eyes hadn't moved from the dial. That was the watch, he said, barely loud enough to hear. The one I used to keep a picture of in my study. I didn't say anything right away. The moment was heavier than I expected. It wasn't just about the watch. It was about everything that came before it. Michael, Mom said suddenly, "That watch is worth—" "How much is that watch worth?" "Last I checked," Kevin answered for me. "Around 2 million. Maybe more, depending on the condition and provenance." The room went quiet again. This time, there wasn't even the sound of forks or plates. Just the low hum of the ceiling vent above our heads. Aunt Linda reached for her purse almost reflexively, pulling it into her lap, like the value of her handbag had somehow dropped in the last 30 seconds. Uncle Richard looked uncomfortable, like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or annoyed. Kevin, for once, didn't have much to say. "It's beautiful," Dad said finally. "I never thought I'd see one up close." "It's not just any model," I said, resting my wrist on the edge of the table. "It's that model. The one from the picture." I remembered every detail. He blinked slowly like he was waking up from something. "But how?" Before I could answer, Kevin spoke up again, trying to get his footing. "Wait, what do you even do now? I thought you were still working on that app thing." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the company dashboard. Not the newest phone, just a solid, secure model we used internally. I slid it across the table toward him. "We build AI-based financial trading algorithms," I said. "We serve firms across Tokyo, London, and Singapore. Mostly back-end infrastructure." Quiet work. Kevin stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "This valuation, this can't be right." 11.2 billion, I said. "After last month's round." Uncle Richard leaned in, glanced at the screen, and gave a low whistle. "You're telling me your company is worth over $11 billion? "On paper," I said. "Valuations are funny things, but the growth is real." Dad still hadn't looked at the phone. He was watching me instead. "Is this why you've been taking the bus all these years?" Mom asked, her voice a little higher than usual. "We thought you couldn't afford a car." "I usually take calls during the commute," I said. "It's quieter, easier to focus." Kevin was still staring at the dashboard. "Wait. Quantum trade?" His voice cracked a little. "You're the firm merging with Quantum Trade?" I nodded once. He looked stunned. "We're handling part of the diligence process on that deal." "Then you'll probably see more of our platform soon," I said. He sat back like the wind had gone out of him. Aunt Linda leaned in with new energy. "Michael, honey, you never said anything. Why didn't you tell us all this sooner? We all thought—" "I know," I said. I glanced around the table. All the people who had once asked if I needed help with rent. The same relatives who'd traded smirks when I arrived with my plain phone and my quiet clothes. Now they didn't know where to look. "Your firm handles 30% of Asia's AI trades?" Uncle Richard asked. "That's what it says here. Closer to 40% after next month's merger." The silence returned, dense and uneasy. Michael, Aunt Linda said, her tone changing again, "You really should come out to the country club. There's someone I'd love for you to meet." "Can?" I said, checking my phone. "Board meeting in Singapore." Dad spoke up again, softer this time. "You're flying. My jet leaves Friday," I said. Kevin's eyes flicked toward me. "Your jet? Just a small one?" I said, though I usually take the bus to the airport. The words sat there for a moment. No one laughed. No one spoke. After dinner, while everyone was gathering their coats, Dad followed me outside. The sidewalk was slick from a recent drizzle. He stood beside me quietly for a few seconds before speaking. "That watch," he said. "You remember that photo?" I nodded. It was on your desk for years. I never thought anyone noticed. I noticed. He looked down at my wrist, then back up at me. That's the one, isn't it? I unbuckled the strap slowly. It's yours. He stepped back, shaking his head. I can't accept that. I bought two, I said. This one's for you. Mine's in Singapore. He reached for the watch hands unsteady and held it like something sacred. Kevin's voice echoed from behind us, still on the phone. Uncle Richard was close by, speaking quickly to someone else. I heard Aunt Linda's voice too louder than before, probably mentioning a mutual friend in tech. None of it mattered. Dad looked down at the watch again. You bought it. For me, I had to make sure no one else got it. He nodded slowly. There was a bidding war. The price went higher than expected. I was the other bidder, I said. He looked at me for a long time. You did all this. You built all of it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Behind us, the sound of car doors slamming. Laughter that didn't quite reach the sidewalk. Come to Singapore next week, I said. I'll show you what I built. Dad smiled. First class on the jet, I said. Mom stepped out just then, holding her phone. Michael. Dear, have you seen this picture? Linda's friend has a daughter. I'm seeing someone, I said. She runs AI research at MIT. We met at a keynote. Mom blinked. Of course. Dad was still looking at the watch. I used to tell you it wasn't about money, he said. It was about the craftsmanship, the precision. I remember, I said. He nodded again. You built something rare, and as we turned toward the curb, I knew we weren't going back to the dinner table the same way we'd left it. The night after the dinner, I rode the bus home like I always did. It was late enough that most of the seats were empty. I took one near the back next to the window and let the streetlights flicker across my reflection. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll through numbers or updates or anything waiting from the Tokyo office. I just sat there watching the city move past in quiet streaks of light and shadow. My stop was 3 blocks from my building. I walked the rest of the way, coat zipped up, collar turned against the wind. It wasn't cold yet, but it would be soon. That time of year, when everything gets a little sharper in the air and the sidewalks start to feel more hollow underfoot. The doorman nodded as I came in, familiar and friendly. He didn't ask where I'd been. I went upstairs, unlocked the apartment, and stood in the entry for a moment before turning on the lights. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, neat, quiet, plain. I kicked off my shoes, hung my coat, and crossed the room to the bookshelf. I pulled down the photo of Dad's old collection. It had been tucked behind a row of trade journals for years. The edges were soft now, corners slightly curled. I sat down with it at the kitchen table and traced the lineup with my eyes, 7 watches each with its own place and purpose. The one on the far right had always been his favorite. He called it the impossible one, the one he'd never afford but always talked about. Back when I was in high school, I used to sit in his study just to listen to him talk about them. He didn't speak much those days, not about emotions anyway. But if you got him started on complications, moon phases, perpetual calendars, his whole posture changed. He became someone else. Steady, careful, proud. After the crash, everything changed. The collection was sold off one piece at a time. By the time I graduated college, the case was gone, the desk was bare, and the door to the study mostly stayed closed. Dad pushed hard after that. On me. On Scott. He wanted stability, not risk. I knew he meant well, but every time I mentioned a project, a startup idea, something I wanted to build, he would ask if it had a backup plan. The truth is, those early years were quiet in a way no one really saw. I lived with 3 other guys in a 1-bedroom apartment outside Oakland. We split everything, utilities, groceries, even 1 car between us. We ate the same meals on rotation. Pasta, eggs, rice, repeat. My laptop sat on a folding table next to the heater, and some nights I had to wear gloves while I coded because the heat wasn't reliable. I didn't tell anyone back home. Not because I was ashamed, just because there was never any room in those conversations. When we did talk, it was usually about Scott. He had gotten a job at Morgan & Becker straight out of grad school. Dad was proud. He told everyone. At holidays, Scott would show up in pressed suits and leave with leftovers packed by Mom. I usually stayed quiet, helped clean up, and caught a ride back into town with an old friend. For a while, the only place I felt like I was making sense was on the screen in front of me. Lines of code, data patterns, models that got a little better with every tweak. When our first algorithm hit its target return rate, we stayed up all night trying to figure out if it was a fluke. When it held the next week and the next, we knew we had something. But we still didn't talk about it. Not even with each other. Just more work, more refinement, and a notebook full of sketches for what would come next. The funding didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in through quiet emails and small investors. The big names didn't come until after we proved we could handle volume. Even then, I kept riding the bus. I liked the way it gave me time to think. I liked that nobody on it cared what I was building. They just wanted to get home. I remember one night a few years ago, I visited Mom and Dad unannounced. It was late, maybe close to midnight. I had just gotten back from Tokyo and couldn't sleep. I rang the bell and waited. Dad opened the door in his robe and slippers. He looked surprised, but he let me in. We didn't say much. He made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. There was a photo on the fridge, Scott holding up a big trout beside some mountain lake. I asked about the photo. He told me Scott had joined a fly fishing club. Said he was learning balance. Then he asked how my job was going. "It's steady," I said. "Busy." He nodded and stirred his tea. I caught his eyes drifting to my watch, just a regular Timex back then, but he didn't say anything. That was the last time we spoke, just the two of us before tonight. Everything in between happened quietly. The rounds, the growth, the buyouts, the move to New York. I didn't hide it, but I didn't announce it either. Some things don't need a headline. That's what made tonight feel different. When he saw the watch, it wasn't about the money. It was about the story it carried, the years in between. What I did with the lessons he once gave me. I turned the photo over in my hands. The tape on the back had dried out years ago. I'd have to replace it if I wanted to frame it. Maybe I would. Maybe I'd even build a new case. One, like the one he used to have, only this time with pieces for both of us. I looked at the time. Still early in Singapore. The dashboard would be active soon. I set the photo down gently and got up to turn out the lights. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The apartment was still the windows, dark against the skyline, and the only sound came from the hum of the heating system switching on. I made coffee like I always did, French press, no sugar, and brought the mug over to the window. Below, the city was just starting to stir. Taxis easing through intersections, streetlights blinking out one by one. It was the kind of quiet I'd learned to appreciate. Predictable, steady, undemanding. I opened the laptop on the counter, typed in the security key, and logged into the dashboard. Our Tokyo team had finished their overnight work. Numbers were clean. Trade volumes on schedule. Our models had hit accuracy targets across 5 indexes. Everything was right where it needed to be. No surprises. Just the way we'd built it. That was the point. The company had started with code, but it didn't stay there. Over time, the language of the work shifted. Investors, advisors, partners, mergers. Everyone wanted to talk about scaling and strategy, but I always came back to the foundation precision clarity function. Not because it was flashy, because it worked. A little after 8, a message came through from London. One of our longtime clients wanted to arrange a face-to-face. I added it to the schedule and forwarded the itinerary to Elaine, my operations lead. She was good with details, better than I was. She'd also been with the company since it was just 6 of us in a borrowed office space above a coffee shop. By 9, I'd answered every urgent message, pushed updates to the team, and shut the laptop. I stood in the middle of the room, holding the empty mug, not quite sure what to do next. It was a Friday. Normally, I'd go into the downtown office, touch base with leadership, sit through 2 or 3 meetings I didn't need to attend. But I stayed home. Around 10, I pulled the storage box down from the top shelf of the closet. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside were a few things from the early days: first pitch deck, old prototypes, an external drive with backups from the original algorithm. On the bottom, wrapped in a faded t-shirt, was the auction certificate. The watch. Lot 17. Sold above estimate. I sat on the floor and unrolled the paper. My handwriting was on the corner, just a short note to the seller, asking that the watch be packed with care. At the time, I hadn't planned on giving it away, but the more I looked at it, the more I understood why I had. Dad had always called it a masterpiece, not just because it was rare, but because it couldn't be rushed. Every piece of that watch had to be cut, shaped, and finished by hand. Hundreds of hours for one. That was the bar. That was the example. For years, I thought I was trying to prove something to him, that the work I was doing mattered, that it could stand beside the careers he respected. But sitting there on the carpet, holding that paper in my hand, it felt different. It wasn't about outgrowing anything. It was about returning to the core of what I'd learned from him a long time ago. Not everything needed to be loud to be meaningful. Some things were built in silence, refined in private, and finished without applause. I called the airport and confirmed the flight. 2 additional passengers, first class. No changes needed. The jet would be ready Saturday morning. I sent the confirmation to Mom's email. She called 30 minutes later. "Michael, this itinerary, are you sure?" Her voice sounded cautious, not uncertain, just soft around the edges. "Positive," I said. "The board wants to meet, and I'd like you and Dad to come. See it for yourselves." There was a pause. "Then he hasn't stopped looking at the watch since last night." "That's good," I said. Another pause. "He told me this morning it reminded him of who he used to be." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to. "Anyway," she added, "we'll pack tonight." I thanked her and ended the call. Later that evening, I stepped outside and walked the long route to the small park near the river. It was quiet there, even in the city. You could hear the water from the walkway and the rustle of wind through the old oak trees. I sat on a bench and watched the sky turn gold behind the skyline. Everything in the last 24 hours had shifted, not because of the company, not even because of the money. It was the look on Dad's face when he held that watch. Not as a collector, not even as a father, but as someone who saw a piece of himself reflected in what had been quietly built in the years between. When I got back to the apartment, the dashboard pinged with one final message from Tokyo. A quiet confirmation. The numbers were strong. The algorithm updates were holding. The merger had cleared the final review. I closed the screen and turned off the lights. The flight would leave at 10. They'd see it all soon enough. The airport was quiet when we arrived. It was still early, the sun just beginning to rise behind the long rows of glass windows along the terminal. I had arranged for private boarding, so there was no crowd, no announcements. Just the low hum of air vents and the soft click of our shoes on the polished floor. Mom was the first to speak. "It's bigger than I thought," she said, glancing toward the jet parked just beyond the glass. Her voice was even, but I could hear the edge of curiosity in it. "It's mid-size," I said. "Seats 10 comfortably. We usually keep it to 6. She nodded, then turned to look at Dad. He hadn't said much on the drive in. He sat beside me in the car, looking out the window like he was still trying to place all of this with the son he thought he'd known. Once we boarded, the flight crew greeted us and offered coffee. Mom accepted. Dad didn't. He stayed standing for a moment, then walked slowly toward one of the leather seats near the front and lowered himself down without a word. I followed, sat across from him, and waited while the engines began to warm. The hum grew stronger, but inside the cabin, it was quiet. Just the two of us, with Mom tucked a few rows back, flipping through a magazine she wasn't really reading. I reached into my carry-on, unzipped the inside pocket, and pulled out the case. It was small black leather, nothing flashy. I held it in my lap for a moment before placing it on the armrest between us. "I meant to give you this before the dinner," I said, but the timing didn't feel right. He looked at it, then at me. "What is it?" "Open it." His hands were steady as he picked it up and flipped the clasp. Inside, resting against a suede backing, was the second Dufour. Identical model, same movement, same engraving. A match down to the serial range. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the case, set it gently on the table beside him, and leaned back in his seat. "You bought two." I nodded. "They both came up at auction." "They were listed together," I said. "Unusual, but I placed bids on both." He gave a slow exhale. "You drove the price up. I needed to make sure they stayed together." He looked out the window for a moment. The jet had started to move slow at first, then turning toward the runway. He didn't say anything until the wheels lifted off. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "You remembered what I used to say about them." I didn't answer. He knew I had. "I kept that photo on my desk for 20 years, he said. "Even after I sold the others. That one, I never thought I'd touch it. I used to think if I ever did, it would mean I'd made it back." He looked over at me again. "But I never did." I met his eyes. "You taught me what it meant to aim for something that couldn't be rushed. That's how we built the company. Every piece. Every part." He didn't speak right away. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just full. Finally, he opened the case again, took out the watch, and turned it over in his hand. The light caught the moon phase dial, and he tilted it, watching the shadow move across the surface. "It's more than I deserve," he said. "It was always yours." He placed it on his wrist without another word. The rest of the flight passed quietly. We reviewed the board schedule together, went over the facility tour, and I offered to walk them through the architecture of the newest trading platform. Mom asked a few questions about staff and offices. Dad asked more about the data structure. It was the most we'd spoken, just the three of us, in years. When we landed, the company car was waiting. I handed the driver our luggage and gave him the route to the hotel. I had arranged a separate suite for them near the central business district, quiet, secure, with a view of the harbor. Before they got in, Dad reached for my shoulder. "I don't think I ever understood what you were building," he said. "Not really." I shook my head. "That's all right. Most people didn't." He nodded once, then looked down at his wrist. "It's accurate," he said, more to himself than to me. "Landed within a second." I smiled. That's what it was designed to do. As they got into the car, I stepped back, watching them pull away. The city moved around me, taxis sliding past, pedestrians crossing with umbrellas, scooters weaving between lanes. Everything felt steady, familiar. I took out my phone and checked the time. My team was already inside the building, prepping for the call with London. I'd join shortly. But for now, I stayed where I was, watching the street, holding that moment. Just a little longer. Word got out faster than I expected. The announcement hadn't even been published yet, just a brief mention in an international finance bulletin about a pending acquisition, and already my phone was lighting up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were vague fishing for confirmation. Others were more direct. A few congratulated me without saying what for trying to sound casual while circling the real question. By the time I stepped into the boardroom that Monday, the memo had reached Goldman's Singapore office. Kevin's name was still listed in the CC line. He hadn't written me directly, but I'd seen the open alert on our internal platform. He knew. Uncle Richard would know by now, too. So would Aunt Linda. Later that afternoon, after the executive team wrapped our internal debrief, I scrolled through the analytics dashboard again. Engagement was up across the board: client usage platform, stability model, precision. The algorithm had outperformed expectations over the weekend. Quiet success, the kind that didn't make headlines but reshaped markets in real time. That night, after dinner with Mom and Dad at the hotel, I stepped out onto the balcony with a glass of water. The harbor below reflected the city lights in long, slow ripples. The two of them had talked more than usual during the meal. Mom asked thoughtful questions about the staff, the cities I rotated through, the partners involved in the merger. Dad didn't say much, but I noticed he kept glancing at his wrist. The watch fit him. Not just physically. It belonged with him. The next morning, I had an email from Scott. Subject line: heard something interesting today. Short message. No greeting. Just one sentence. Is it true I didn't reply right away? I read it twice, then closed the tab. We hadn't spoken much over the past few years. Not out of conflict, just distance. He'd chosen a path closer to what Dad once wanted. Steady, predictable, well-lit. By Wednesday, news of the acquisition was public. Quantum's announcement came just before market open. Our name was attached in the first line. The headlines used words like historic, industry-changing, and unexpected. I muted all alerts before lunch. That afternoon, Mom called from the hotel room. She and Dad had visited the central office on their own. One of the team leads had given them a tour. She described the view from the executive floor, said the staff had been kind, helpful, even called her Mrs. Reed with quiet deference. I could hear something in her voice, soft, unsure, like she was still putting pieces together. We had no idea, she said. I know. He didn't either, she added. Not really. Not until he saw the building, the people. I'm glad you came, I said. Later that evening, while reviewing investor updates, I got a call from my cousin Nicole. She rarely reached out. Lived out in Connecticut, now married into some pharmaceutical family. She kept her tone light, but asked about the company, then about future rounds. She mentioned her husband's portfolio, then her own. I'm not looking to invest, she said quickly. Just curious. I thanked her for calling, told her I'd keep her in mind, then hung up before the next question came. By Friday, I'd received 5 separate emails from extended family members. Some subtle, some not. Kevin finally wrote too. A full paragraph this time. He congratulated me on the merger, said he'd heard about the valuation and thought it was impressive, then asked if we had room for an advisory role in our U.S. division. I didn't respond. That weekend back in New York, I stopped by my old apartment before heading downtown. I hadn't been back in a while. The place was smaller than I remembered. Sparse. Still had the folding table I used as a desk for those first few years. I stood in the doorway for a minute, then stepped inside and ran my hand along the edge of the kitchen counter. On the way out, I took the old framed photo of Dad's watch collection with me. When I got to the new office, Elaine was waiting by the elevator. You've had 4 press requests this morning, she said. One wants to do a feature on your background. I'm not interested, I figured, she said, handing me the folder. But they're asking questions about the watch. I paused. Which one, the Dufour? I nodded once. Let legal know I won't be commenting. It's not part of the story. She gave a slight smile. Understood. Later that afternoon, after most of the team had gone home, I sat alone in the conference room and looked out over the city. Across the table was the newest iteration of our platform architecture. Efficient, stable, precise. It had taken years to build thousands of small decisions. No shortcuts. No announcements. Just one day after another. I glanced at the photo beside me. 7 watches. One missing from the lineup, and now somehow both in the right hands. The call from Dad came later that night. I got a message from Kevin, he said. Wanted to know if I'd put in a word for him. I waited. I didn't reply, he added. Didn't feel right. I let out a breath. Thank you. There was a pause on the line. Then, your mother wants to come back next quarter. Says she liked the park by the harbor. She's welcome any time, I said. As I hung up, I thought about how far the story had traveled. From a quiet seat at a family dinner to a city skyline half a world away, and it wasn't done yet. The next time I saw them all again was at Aunt Carol's retirement party. She'd spent 37 years in the school district, and the family had reserved the banquet hall at the country club for the occasion. The invitation came by mail, thick cardstock with raised lettering and gold trim. I didn't RSVP, but Mom called to ask if I was going. She said it would mean a lot to Carol, and Dad added quietly that it might be good to come home for a minute. I flew in from San Francisco the night before and stayed at a small hotel outside of town. It was easier that way. The next afternoon, I arrived just as the first speeches were wrapping up. The room was filled with voices, clinking glassware, and the soft shuffle of chairs against carpet. White tablecloths, tall floral arrangements framed photos of Carol with her students through the years. Scott spotted me first. He was standing near the bar, talking to a man I didn't recognize. His face changed the second our eyes met, surprise, first, then something quieter. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, but didn't wave me over. I made my way toward the back near a table that hadn't filled yet. On my way, I passed Kevin, who was deep in conversation with Uncle Richard and someone from the Rotary Club. He glanced at me, but didn't say anything. His eyes dropped briefly to my wrist, then shifted away. The seat next to mine was empty for a while, but eventually Nicole joined. She greeted me with a warm smile, her tone almost too casual. I read the article, she said, unfolding her napkin. The one about the merger. It was in the Journal last week. I nodded. They got most of it right. She laughed softly. Most of it? That's still impressive. Everyone's been talking about it. I thanked her. She asked how long I was in town if I was still based in New York, then pivoted toward a question about real estate in Singapore. I answered politely, then turned the conversation toward Aunt Carol, which gave her an easy excuse to stand up and go find someone else. Dinner was served not long after roast chicken, seasonal vegetables, something with couscous. I ate quietly. Across the room, Mom and Dad were seated with the guests of honor. Every now and then, I saw Dad tilt his wrist to check the time, then glance across the room toward me. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't guarded either. Just present. When dessert came, the room quieted again for another round of speeches. Carol stood at the front, flanked by a few former students and her old principal. The stories were kind familiar, full of little jokes about hallway mishaps and field trips gone wrong. People clapped, laughed, nodded along. Then Uncle Richard was invited up. He spoke for a while about legacy, responsibility, hard work. His voice smooth, his posture practiced. He ended with a toast, raising his glass and thanking Carol for showing the family what quiet excellence looked like. The words hung in the air longer than they needed to. After the applause, the crowd relaxed again into soft conversation and refilled drinks. Kevin made his way over, then standing just behind my chair. I saw your name in the filing, he said. Didn't think you'd put it in directly. We always keep final approval in-house, I said. Keeps the structure clean. He gave a short nod, then cleared his throat. Dad mentioned you might be expanding stateside. We're reviewing a few cities, I said. I'd be interested in hearing more if you're taking on advisors. I looked at him. He shifted slightly, adjusting his cuff. I think we're all right for now, I said. He hesitated, then nodded again. Well, congrats. You've built something serious. He walked off without waiting for a reply. Aunt Linda came over a few minutes later. She touched my arm as she leaned in the way she always had at family events when trying to make a point. Michael, you must let me introduce you to Anna Mae's granddaughter, she said. She just finished her MBA Sharp Girl. You'd get along. I'm seeing someone, I said, keeping my tone even. She's based at MIT. Oh, she said, blinking. Well, how wonderful! She didn't say much after that. As the night wound down, I helped Mom and Dad gather their things. She slipped a program into her purse. He folded his napkin carefully before standing. You all right? I asked him. He looked around the room, then back at me. They see you differently now. I nodded. They do. It's strange, he said. Not bad, just different. We walked out together toward the car. The air had cooled, and the lot was quiet. No cameras, no fanfare, just family filing out in little clusters murmuring goodbyes. Dad opened the passenger door for Mom, then turned to me as I walked around. She kept the watch box, he said. The one from the flight. Put it on the dresser next to the photo. I smiled. That's a good place for it. He nodded. I told her we might visit again next quarter. You should. We stood there a moment longer before parting ways. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. I rolled the window down halfway and listened to the wind shift around the car. It's been a few months since that night at the country club. The merger finalized ahead of schedule, and the company's footprint in Asia is stronger than we projected. There are new offices now, Singapore, Zurich, Chicago, with teams I trust running the day-to-day. I still keep a quiet apartment in New York. Same building, same walk to the corner store. I never moved into anything bigger. Mom and Dad came out last month. We took the long route through Central Park, stopped at the library steps, walked past the Met just before closing. Dad wore the watch. I didn't say anything, but I noticed him check it more than once, his thumb brushing the edge of the case like he was still making sure it was real. When we got back to my place, he asked if I still had the picture. I pulled it from the drawer now framed behind glass. He took a long look at it, then set it beside his chair, and asked if we could go through the names again. One by one. I've been thinking about that first dinner a lot lately, the way the silence fell across the table, the sound of chopsticks clattering onto porcelain. I remember the weight of every pause, every glance, but more than that, I remember the moment that came after. When my dad saw what was on my wrist, and something in him shifted. Not out of pride, not even out of recognition, just a quiet acknowledgement that something he once believed in had survived through me. I still ride the bus when I'm in the city. Not every day, but often enough. I keep the noise off the notifications muted and let the rhythm of the route settle around me. There's something steady about it, people going about their lives, no show, no spotlight, just movement. Most of the people who once questioned me don't ask anymore. Some reach out with polite interest. Some don't say anything at all. And that's all right. I didn't build any of this to be seen. I built it because I wanted to get something right. To make something that would last. Something honest. My dad still keeps the watch box on his dresser right next to the old photo. When I visited last week, I noticed he'd put his other timepieces back on display just 4 now in a new case. He said he's not trying to rebuild the collection. Just wanted to remember what it felt like to admire something for its precision. Some things change us slowly. Not with a bang, not with a headline, but with a steady hand and a quiet choice repeated over years. That's how you build trust again. That's how you find your way back to what matters. If you're still listening, thank you for staying with me. And if there's something in your life you've been quietly building, keep going. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just stay steady. Let your work speak. And if this story stayed with you, feel free to share it or leave a comment if it reminded you of someone. I'll be reading. Take care.